Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
He laughed right in my face like it was nothing, like I was still some snot-nosed kid who couldn't throw a football straight or talk without stuttering when someone older than me raised their voice. Rick had this way of talking that made everything he said feel like the final word, even when it was just pure bullshit dressed in confidence and a golf shirt. He leaned back in that cheap plastic chair with a beer gut that looked like it had its own zip code and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "What do you even do for a living these days, Jay?" And then he laughed. That kind of laugh that didn't come from joy, no, this laugh came from power. The kind that slaps you in the face with a smile on it. Now let me set the scene a little better. This wasn't just a Sunday cookout or some backyard get-together. This was Aunt Carol's big 60th birthday bash, complete with folding chairs, overcooked ribs, and enough Miller Lite to float a pontoon boat. All the Ellis clan had crawled out of their corners, the hunters, the chain smokers, the Facebook political warriors, the ones who still called texting that internet stuff. And there I was, Jaden Ellis, the quiet one, sitting next to a cold plate of green bean casserole and wondering how much longer I had to fake smile before I could drive back to the Airbnb. But let me tell you something that maybe you already know deep down. In every family, there's a pecking order. And if you're not the loudest, the strongest, the most charismatic, or the most useful, you get pecked. Doesn't matter if you've got $1 million idea or if you're just trying to keep your damn head down. They remember you how they want to remember you. To them, I was still the quiet kid who spent Christmas in the corner building Legos instead of playing in the snow. The one who came home from college after one semester with circles under my eyes and stories I wouldn't tell. The one who didn't drink much, didn't talk much, and didn't laugh at Rick's stories about the good OL days. And to Rick, I was the biggest punchline of all. He was the self-made man, the big shot in a regional logistics company, Colson Freight, the kind of place that made real money moving real stuff for real people. None of that tech nonsense, as he liked to call it. You know the type, wears business casual to Sunday church, and tells every waiter they should smile more. He'd been king of this family table since I was old enough to know what humiliation tasted like. So when he leaned back, beer in hand, and let that insult fly across the table like it was a damn compliment, I didn't even flinch. I just smiled. Small, polite. But inside, my bones were laughing. Not like his laugh, not loud and cruel. Mine was quiet, like a match struck in the dark. Because he didn't know. None of them knew. He didn't know that 3 months ago, I signed a merger deal worth more than the value of every truck in his fleet times 20. He didn't know that his own board, tired of his outdated systems and lack of innovation, had been eyeing my startup's software for over a year. And he sure as hell didn't know that last week, I'd gotten a call from his own parent company's executive team asking if I'd step in not just as a consultant, but as the incoming CEO of the entire operation. His operation. His empire. His name on the office door. I'd spent years building what no one in this family even bothered to ask about. Coded systems under dim motel lights, pitched investors who barely looked me in the eye, pulled all-nighters until my knuckles cramped from typing. Slept in my damn car while my cousins posted vacation photos and told me to get a real job. And now here I was, sitting across from the man who used to hold my head underwater in the lake and call it toughening me up, wondering whether I should break the news now or let it hit him like a brick in the morning. Around the second minute of this little train wreck of a dinner, I caught my cousin Amy looking at me like she half suspected something was different. Maybe it was the watch. I'd worn something subtle, but not Walmart subtle. Maybe it was how I didn't shrink into myself when Rick laughed. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone treat you like dirt just because they never bothered to find out who you became? Just kept treating you like you were 15, broke, and invisible? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had that moment when someone finally realizes they were laughing at the wrong damn person. Rick moved on, of course, talked about how much the company had grown, how he just closed a sweet little deal in Indiana, and how some of these kids think an app can replace hard work. He didn't look at me when he said that last part, but he didn't have to. I could have ended it right there, pulled out my phone, opened the press release draft with my name bolded at the top, and dropped it right onto the birthday cake. But I didn't. Not yet. Because timing is everything. And I didn't want to win. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt for years. The weight of being ignored, laughed at, underestimated. I wanted him to see it unravel in slow motion. So I just smiled and asked him about the Indiana deal. Listened. Nodded. Took notes. The quiet kid, still listening, just like always. But this time, I was listening with the patience of a man who already owns the ending. I left town when I was 19 with nothing but a cracked laptop, a duffel bag that barely zipped shut, and a brain wired to build things people said were impossible, or worse, pointless. There was no grand send-off, no speech from mom at the front porch, no uncle giving me advice about the real world, hell. No one even asked where I was going or why I didn't stick around to work at the tire warehouse like everybody else in our family seemed to do. I didn't leave angry, not exactly. It was more like resignation, that quiet sort of sadness that sits in your chest when you realize no one's going to take your dreams seriously until they've already come true. The first 6 months were brutal, no poetic way around it. I crashed on couches when I could, worked overnight shifts at a 24-hour diner where the grease never left your skin and the manager chain-smoked Marlboros so thick the break room walls turned yellow. In between pouring coffee for truckers and mopping floors sticky with syrup, I wrote code on napkins, back pages of receipt logs, whatever I could get my hands on that wouldn't get tossed out by morning. I didn't have a real computer that worked more than an hour without overheating until the following winter. I taught myself how to build predictive algorithms using free Wi-Fi from the parking lot of a library that smelled like mildew and despair. My idea was simple at first. A system that could learn freight patterns faster than human schedulers, adjust routes on the fly, and shave thousands off monthly shipping costs. People thought I was trying to reinvent the wheel. Truth is, I just saw that the damn wheel hadn't been updated since my uncle was my age, and that pissed me off more than I'd ever admit out loud. It wasn't about revenge back then. It was survival, proving to myself that I wasn't crazy for believing efficiency didn't have to be ugly. By the time I was 22, I was sleeping in my car behind the diner most nights, brushing my teeth with bottled water in gas station bathrooms, and emailing prototypes to venture capital firms who didn't even open them. The only messages I got back were automated rejections, that and the occasional scammer trying to sell me exposure or mentorship for $500. But I didn't quit. Couldn't. I had nothing to fall back on, and frankly, I didn't want to. Going home meant explaining that the quiet kid with the big ideas didn't make it. And there's a kind of failure that feels worse than death when it's served cold by your own family at Thanksgiving dinner. Then, one day, a reply came through not from some polished Silicon Valley type, but from a woman named Nadira in Houston who ran a shipping startup of her own and wanted to test my software. She didn't care that I didn't have a team or an office or even reliable internet. What she cared about was the math. And the math, for once, did the talking better than I ever could. One contract turned into 5. Then came a grant. Then, a pilot program with a major Midwest freight hub. Within a year, I had a rented office space, 2 employees, and enough income to pay off the $3,000 in credit card debt I'd racked up living like a ghost. But even then, no one back home seemed to notice, or maybe they didn't want to. Every now and then, I'd get a message from a cousin asking if I could hook them up with a job in tech, or worse, asking if I could fix their laptop, like I was still some basement IT guy pushing buttons for other people. And Rick? Still acted like I didn't exist. Or worse, like I was some disappointing shadow of his version of manhood. His company, Colson Freight, kept growing on the surface, but from what I heard through trade articles and whispers in the industry, the cracks were showing. His software was outdated, employee turnover was high, and the new generation of logistics firms, companies like mine, were bleeding him from the margins, one route at a time. That's when the sharks started circling. His parent company, The giant umbrella corporation that swallowed up regional transport companies like his started shopping for innovation. They wanted modernization. They wanted AI that could cut costs, not legacy leadership stuck in the 80s. And guess whose name was in their mouth? Mine. Not because of nepotism. Not because I asked. But because my numbers spoke louder than Rick ever had. The data was clean. The savings were clear. And my software had done in 6 months what his team hadn't managed in 5 years. They didn't just want to acquire my company, they wanted me. The guy nobody in his own family even remembered graduated high school with a math award. The deal was finalized behind closed doors. Rick never saw it coming because he didn't think I was worth seeing. And now, while he's prepping his retirement party, thinking he'll get a plaque and a legacy, he doesn't know that I'm already booked for meetings with the board he used to own. The same men who called him old school now call me a necessary evolution. And the press release? It goes live in 48 hours. His retirement toast will taste a little different with my name burned into the announcement. Have you ever had someone laugh at your success just because they couldn't see past who you used to be? Ever have your past used like a weapon against your future? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear the stories nobody believed were worth listening to, because I remember every time they said I wasn't one of them. I remember every Christmas I spent quiet at the kids' table while Rick made jokes about Jay and his little computers. I remember what it's like to build something from scratch, alone, in silence, while everyone you know treats your ambition like an inconvenience. And I remember what it felt like the moment I saw that board memo with my name right where his used to be. I didn't take Rick's company because I hate him. I took it because he made it clear I was never part of the family business. So I built my own. The next morning, the backyard smelled like charcoal and beer, the kind of stale, sun-warm stink that clings to plastic lawn furniture and brings back memories you'd rather not revisit. Rick was already holding court under the pop-up canopy someone had duct-taped to the grill, red in the face and waving a bottle around like a preacher on his third sermon of the day. I could hear him before I saw him. Something about fuel prices, unions, and how real logistics means real men getting real things done. He liked to talk like that in slogans and hard stares, like life was a pickup truck commercial with a backing track of AC/DC. I could have walked right past him and no one would have noticed, but I didn't come all this way just to sip warm beer and pretend we were family. I came for blood, even if I wasn't sure I wanted to draw it yet. Rick spotted me over the rim of his sunglasses, gave me that same cocky half-smile he used when I was 12, and tried to tell him I was learning to code. "Well, look who finally woke up," he said, like he'd been waiting to ambush me with banter. "You here for the cake, or just freeloading off Aunt Carol's hospitality again?" The table laughed, not hard, just enough to make it known they still understood the script. I smiled the way you do when you've outgrown the game, but can't resist one last round. "Figured I'd come check in on the old empire," I said, nodding toward the cheap folding chair he called a throne. "You mean Coulson?" He grinned, already puffing up. "Bigger than ever. Fuel's killing us, but I made a deal with this refinery in Ohio that'll save us 20 grand a quarter. Plus, I just hired 2 new dispatchers, sharp kids, know how to follow instructions. None of this artificial intelligence crap. People who actually work." He made a show of cracking his knuckles like that somehow sealed the deal, and for a second, I saw what everyone else saw, a man who'd wrestled something out of nothing, slapped his name on it, and dared anyone to question his throne. But I knew better. I'd seen the books. I'd read the memos. I'd gotten the anonymous email 3 days ago, subject line, "He's hiding losses." No signature, just spreadsheets and internal documents attached that painted a story the rest of them hadn't caught on to yet. Coulson wasn't growing. It was leaking. A slow, stupid bleed caused by decades of bad habits and tech ignorance that Rick treated like a badge of honor. He was overleveraged, overconfident, and still spending like it was the boom years. If someone didn't pull the plug soon, the entire operation would collapse under its own weight, and I was the one holding the plug. Alyssa arrived around noon, wearing a faded denim jacket and that calm, observant expression she carried when she smelled bullshit before it started steaming. She didn't grow up around people like Rick, but she'd been around enough men like him in boardrooms and startup pitches to know what it looked like when ego outweighed facts. We met during the second round of funding for my company. She was one of the early angel investors who didn't flinch when I asked for double what others said I was worth. She knew how to spot value in unlikely places, which is probably why she ended up with me. As we moved through the crowd, I leaned toward her and whispered, "Watch him. He's selling a story that's already caught fire." She raised an eyebrow and said, "Is this still about proving a point, or are we here to take the damn castle?" We sat near the edge of the tent, half shielded by Aunt Carol's birthday decorations, glittery banners and drooping balloons that gave the whole setup a kind of sad circus vibe. Rick stood near the grill, barking orders at whoever was closest, tossing slabs of meat onto the fire with the finesse of a drunk lumberjack. Between jokes, he launched into a long-winded tale about mentoring a real promising young guy in his warehouse who didn't waste time on fancy degrees or some digital mumbo-jumbo. "Hard work," he said, pausing for dramatic effect, "is still the only goddamn thing that matters in this world. All these kids building apps and playing with robots? Good luck hauling freight with that when the roads are iced over." Nobody challenged him. They never did. But Alyssa leaned close and said under her breath, "He doesn't even realize you built the software that saved his Detroit route last winter, does he?" I smiled without smiling, because it was true. One of my pilot systems had been silently deployed through a partner carrier, one that worked with Coulson under a subcontract Rick never bothered to read. He'd been running my tech for months and bragging about gut instinct. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the beer coolers were mostly empty, Rick poured himself a heavy-handed scotch and sat in the lawn chair like a man surveying a kingdom he thought was still his. I walked over, slow, deliberate, and stood just close enough to be heard without raising my voice. "I hear you're looking to retire soon," I said, watching his jaw twitch. "Maybe," he said, eyes narrowing. "Maybe not. Depends who they put in next. Someone solid. Not some soft college kid or spreadsheet jockey." You ever think about what happens when someone shows up who already knows how everything works? I asked. He looked at me, the way a man looks at a shadow he doesn't quite recognize, and for a flicker of a second, I think he felt it, that tremor under the surface, that sense that the ground he stood on might not be as firm as he'd always believed. I didn't stay long after that. Alyssa and I walked back to the rental, the night quiet except for the cicadas and the occasional bark from a neighbor's dog. She asked me what the whistleblower said exactly, and I told her the numbers were cooked, vendor payments delayed, fuel rebates pocketed into a separate LLC Rick hadn't disclosed. It was worse than I expected. "Tomorrow," I said, unlocking the door, "I'm taking his chair." Alyssa paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked at me with something between concern and admiration. "And what happens after that?" I stared into the dark street, the hum of the streetlight buzzing overhead like static in my skull. "I'm not sure," I said, "but I'm starting to think he doesn't deserve the soft landing." The morning started with the kind of silence that doesn't last, the thick kind that hangs just before a storm breaks open and washes the ground clean whether you're ready for it or not. At exactly 8 o'clock, the press release hit every major business outlet from Forbes to Freight News Weekly, and within minutes, the buzz turned into a full-blown swarm. Tech visionary Jaden Ellis named incoming CEO of Coulson Logistics. The headline screamed in black and blue serif fonts across phone screens and inbox alerts. They called me a disruptor, a strategist, a fresh face for an old-school industry that had been screaming for a revolution behind closed doors while clinging to outdated methods in public. And Rick? Rick hadn't even poured his coffee yet. His phone started buzzing before his feet hit the floor, call after call, message after message, voicemails with confused voices asking if it was true, emails with links to articles he didn't understand, and finally, texts from board members he thought he had in his back pocket. There's a particular kind of panic that hits a man like Rick when he realizes the world has changed without asking his permission first, and from what I heard later, he nearly tripped over his slippers trying to get dressed fast enough to drive over to Aunt Carol's house, still half-dressed and wild-eyed like a man chasing his past through a field on fire. I was already there, of course, sitting at the brunch table with a stack of pancakes drowning in syrup and a cup of black coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and unresolved family tension. The whispers had already started by the time I took my second bite, people glued to their phones, squinting at tiny headlines, reading out loud like they couldn't believe the words they were saying. Amy gasped loud enough to draw attention, her fork frozen midair while she read the article 3 times in a row. Even Carol, who usually couldn't work her smartphone without calling someone by accident, held up her screen with a stunned expression and said, "Jaden, is this real?" I didn't look up right away. Let it sit there for a moment, the disbelief thick in the air like wood smoke. Then I smiled, just enough to confirm what they already knew but hadn't wanted to believe. "Yeah," I said, folding my napkin slowly. "It's real." Rick kicked open the screen door 10 minutes later like he was storming Omaha Beach, his shirt untucked, sunglasses crooked on his face, and his mouth already halfway into a sentence no one could quite understand. He looked like a man caught between anger and confusion, like someone had swapped the world out from under his feet while he slept. "What the hell is this?" he barked, holding his phone up like it was proof of a crime. "Is this some kind of joke? Some tech PR stunt? Tell me this isn't real." He was yelling before I even stood up, pacing in front of the table like a bull trying to find the matador. Faces turned away. Some people left. Others stayed just to see what would happen. And me? I just sipped my coffee and let him burn himself out. There's something profoundly satisfying about watching a man who always thought he was untouchable finally realize that no one stays on the throne forever. "You asked me what I do for a living," I said when the room had quieted just enough for my voice to cut through. "Now you know." Rick stared at me like he couldn't decide whether to throw a punch or cry. I could see it all over his face, the mix of disbelief, betrayal, and that deep, gnawing fear that maybe he'd been wrong all along. Not just about me, but about the way the world works. About his company. About the future. "You little bastard," he muttered, shaking his head like he could shake away the truth. "You went behind my back. You let them use you to take me out." I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp enough to draw blood. "They didn't use me, Rick. They needed me. And you? You made yourself obsolete." That hit him. I could see the tremor in his jaw, the flush rising up his neck, the way he suddenly looked 20 years older. He turned away for a moment, hands clenched at his sides, like he was trying to hold in everything boiling underneath the surface. He wasn't just humiliated, he was terrified. Because in his mind, legacy was the only thing that mattered, and now it was being rewritten by the kid he never thought was worth listening to. He tried to rally. Claimed the board would never let it happen, that he had influence, that the real stakeholders would never go along with this tech circus. But every word he said sounded like it was pulled from an outdated playbook, and even he knew it. The room had shifted. People were watching me now, not him. Listening to what I had to say, not laughing at the idea that I had something worth hearing. He stumbled through a few more threats, half-baked legal arguments, and weak insults before finally storming out the back door, nearly knocking over Aunt Carol's floral centerpiece on the way. The screen slammed shut behind him, and just like that, the king had left the building. I sat back down, took another bite of pancake, and glanced around the table. Some eyes were wide with disbelief, others narrowed with suspicion, but most of them were just quiet. Processing. Adjusting. Trying to figure out where they stood now that the ground had shifted. Later that afternoon, Alyssa found me alone by the side of the house, where the smell of bacon grease and ego had finally cleared out. She didn't say much at first, just lit a cigarette and leaned against the railing, watching the wind pick at the faded party decorations. "So," she said after a long silence, "was that satisfying?" I thought about it for a while before answering. Parts of it, I said. But honestly, I thought it would feel more like winning. She looked at me, then nodded slowly. That's because you didn't just beat him. You became the storm he never saw coming. I looked down at my phone, where the congratulatory emails and press pings kept coming, piling up like evidence of a victory I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. Because here's the truth, when you take down a man like Rick, you don't just end his chapter. You start writing the next one with his blood still wet on the page. And now I had a decision to make. I could crush him completely, expose the fraud, make sure he was remembered not as a builder, but a liar. Or I could let him walk away with whatever dignity he could still fake in front of a mirror. The board had given me full control, but they didn't tell me what to do with it. That was on me. All of it. And I wasn't sure I liked how that kind of power felt in my hands. There are certain lessons you learn without realizing you're learning them, moments that seem like background noise until they grow teeth and start chewing through your memory, and for me, most of those lessons came wrapped in the voice of a man who never thought twice about making a boy feel small just to feel a little bigger himself. Rick was always the alpha in every room he walked into, not because he earned it, but because he made sure no one dared to challenge it, and I learned early on that challenging Rick meant losing not just the argument, but your dignity, your place at the table, and sometimes your sense of self. When I was 10, I asked him once if I could ride up front in his truck, the big one with the CB radio and the dash covered in dog-eared invoices, and he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Front seats for men, not mistakes." I laughed along with the rest of them because what the hell else could I do at 10 years old with ketchup on my shirt and my father already gone halfway across the country? Mom said Rick didn't mean it, that he was just old school, but what I heard that day never left me. Front seats for men, not mistakes. That was the first time I understood that power didn't just come from money or muscles. It came from timing, from tone, from being able to say the cruel thing first before someone else could find the words to fight back. My father left when I was 8.5, taking with him a duffel bag and the last scraps of normalcy that had kept our house from falling into the kind of silence you can't fix with noise. After that, Rick stepped in not as a father figure, not even as an uncle really, but as this looming example of what a real man looked like. He taught me things without ever meaning to, like how not to cry in public, how to keep my voice level even when I wanted to scream, and how to let humiliation sit in your gut until it hardened into something useful. Rick thought he was toughening me up. What he was actually doing was teaching me how to lose quietly. And I did lose over and over. I lost arguments, I lost space, I lost the benefit of the doubt. I lost time I should have spent being a kid because I was too busy rehearsing my sentences to make sure I didn't stutter in front of him, too busy trying to disappear in rooms where his voice boomed like a shotgun and his laughter meant someone, usually me, had said something wrong again. He made sure I knew my place, and I made sure to memorize every square inch of it, just in case someone asked me later how I got so good at waiting for my moment. This morning, I found something buried in a company file labeled with a timestamp from 2 weeks before the press release. It was a forwarded internal memo, dry legal language, brief and clinical, but one sentence stood out like it had been highlighted with a branding iron. Ellis acquisition under review, subject previously flagged as conflict risk by current executive leadership. I read it again, slower this time, and then opened the attached documents, dozens of them, all marked as reviewed by one person. R.C. Morgan. Rick. He'd seen the proposal. He knew my company was being folded into the same machine he'd spent decades building. And he didn't just ignore it, he tried to stop it. He didn't fail to recognize me. He didn't overlook my name like it was a typo or a coincidence. He knew, and he pushed back. He flagged me as a threat, as a conflict risk, and when that didn't work, he went quiet. He didn't want to confront me, he wanted to erase me before I ever showed up. That hit harder than anything he ever said to my face. Because now I understood something else he'd taught me. Silence wasn't just a form of dismissal. It was fear, wrapped in the appearance of control. Rick hadn't just underestimated me. He'd feared what I could become. And now that I had become it, he was unraveling faster than I expected. I printed the memo and folded it neatly into my back pocket, not because I wanted to wave it in his face, but because I needed the reminder that even when he looked at me like a stranger, he saw enough of the old version of me to know how dangerous the new one was. Funny how a man like that teaches you everything you need to beat him without even realizing it. He gave me the blueprint and then acted surprised when I built the damn fortress. I was still sitting with that thought when Mom, Susan, to the rest of the world, but always just Mom to me, found me on the back steps of Carol's house, chain-smoking through a pack I'd found in the glove box even though I hadn't touched cigarettes in almost 6 years. She moved slow these days, always in cardigans and sensible shoes, and she sat next to me like she used to do when I was 13 and hiding from Rick's latest tantrum. "Jay," she said, and her voice cracked just a little, like it was caught between 2 decades of not knowing what to say. "Don't humiliate him. Please." I didn't answer right away because I didn't know how to, not without unloading everything I'd carried for 20 years straight into her lap, like a confession I didn't want to give. She looked old suddenly, not in the way of wrinkles or gray hair, but in the way a person looks when they're tired of cleaning up after the men they thought they could fix. "He's still your blood," she added, and that was the part that made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. Because that was always the defense, wasn't it? The blood. Like biology was supposed to excuse everything that came after it. Like DNA could wash away the bruises you couldn't show anyone. I turned to her and said, "He's your blood, Mom." All I got from him was lessons on how to swallow failure without making a sound. She didn't respond. She just looked away, toward the backyard where Rick had once tackled me into a mud pit during a family football game and called it just playing around. I knew what she wanted. She wanted peace. Closure. A version of the story where I rose above it all and let him ride off into retirement with his reputation mostly intact. But the truth is, some men don't deserve that kind of ending. Some men need to be remembered for what they were, not what their families pretend they became. And I wasn't sure anymore if mercy was what Rick needed or what he feared most. For the rest of that afternoon, her words echoed in my head like a slow-dripping faucet you can't shut off, steady and irritating in the way only guilt can be when it's got history to back it up. "He's still your blood," she said, like that was supposed to mean something, like that was some kind of magic spell meant to freeze time and absolve decades of bullshit, just because the man who hurt me happens to share half of her childhood memories. I sat with that phrase longer than I wanted to, ran it through every version of my younger self that used to believe my mother when she said things would settle down if I just stayed quiet, if I just didn't push back, if I didn't make waves. It wasn't the first time she'd asked me to protect Rick. Not even close. I remember being 13, cornered in the garage while Rick reeked of whiskey and spit half-coherent insults about how I needed to toughen up and stop acting like a little girl because I didn't want to hold a damn socket wrench the way he barked at me to. When I told Mom later, not even to complain, just to say it happened, she'd pressed her lips together in that tight way she always did and told me, "He's under a lot of pressure. Let it go, Jaden." And I did. Over and over, I let it go until letting it go became so much a part of me I couldn't even tell where it stopped and I started. But I'm not 13 anymore. And I'm not looking to make waves. I am the wave. That night, Rick tried to circle his wagons, called 2 board members, and even sent an email to the regional heads of Coulson trying to stir some loyalty from men who used to depend on his approval. I know because one of them forwarded it to me with the subject line, "Is this guy for real?" His message was as desperate as it was arrogant, filled with phrases like hostile takeover, nepotism by backdoor, and unqualified leadership with dangerous priorities. He accused me of being a tech brat with no real-world experience and claimed I'd gut the company in favor of digital garbage. The funniest part? He ended it with, "I made this company with my own hands." As if anyone had forgotten. By morning, not a single person had responded to him. Not one. Because Rick was still playing a game that no longer existed, in a world where power had changed hands and he didn't even understand the rules anymore. His name didn't carry weight now, it dragged behind him like a rusted anchor, heavy and useless in waters too deep for shouting to make a difference. And yet, in all that, I couldn't stop hearing my mother's voice, couldn't stop questioning whether I was doing this because it was right or because it felt good to finally win. Alyssa, always sharper than I gave her credit for, watched me spin in place that evening and finally sat me down like a coach about to lay into a tired athlete. "You don't have to prove anything anymore, Jay," she said, her voice calm but hard in the center, like steel wrapped in flannel. "You've already won. You've already beaten him. But how you walk away from this, that's what's going to define the kind of leader you actually want to be." I looked at her and said the only thing that felt honest. "I don't know what kind of leader I want to be. I just know what kind of man I don't want to become." She didn't answer, just nodded slowly like she'd heard that before from 100 other men who'd clawed their way up from the dirt and weren't sure if their hands could ever feel clean again. She reached into the drawer and handed me something I didn't even know I'd left behind. A letter. Old. Yellowed. Folded twice. It was postmarked from Tucson, dated 3 years after my father left. "I found it last year when we were packing up your mom's attic," she said. "It had your name on it. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you." I opened it slowly, careful like it might fall apart in my hands, and I recognized the handwriting immediately, sharp angles and uneven lines. My father's chicken scratch scrawl that I hadn't seen since I was 8 and didn't yet know how much it would hurt to have a man disappear on you without saying goodbye. The letter wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. He said he'd tried to stay in touch, but someone kept returning the letters. Said he sent gifts, but they were never acknowledged. He talked about wanting to call, but being told, "Jay doesn't want to talk to you right now." Said he didn't know if I hated him, but he hoped I knew he never left because of me. And the final line hit me like a punch to the ribs, short and honest and cruel in how much truth it carried. "If you ever read this, it means you've started asking questions. Don't stop, Jay. Don't ever stop." I sat there holding that letter like it was a weapon I didn't know I needed, and my mind immediately went back to Rick. To the way he always answered questions about my dad with vague shrugs and redirected anger. To the way he took over as the man of the house and never let anyone question it. And suddenly I knew. He hadn't just bullied me out of fear or boredom, he'd taken everything my father left behind and locked it up to make sure I never had a reason to look backward. Rick didn't just raise his voice because he thought it made him strong. He raised it so no one could hear the truth underneath. I walked outside into the cold night air, the letter still clutched in my hand like a piece of my childhood I hadn't known was missing. And I realized then that my blood wasn't what made Rick my family. It was what made him my first opponent. So when Mom came out later and looked at me like she still wanted me to choose peace, I said what I should have said years ago. "Blood's just another word, Mom. It doesn't mean what you think it does." And I turned away before she could say anything else. Because I already knew she would. Because I already knew I wouldn't be able to forgive the man who taught me how to lose by making sure I never got a chance to win until now. There's a strange stillness that settles over a room right before you say something that's going to change the way everyone in it sees you. A quiet that doesn't feel like peace, but more like held breath and loaded glances. The kind of silence that dares you to either rise or sink right through the floor. That's what I walked into that morning, the Coulson Logistics executive boardroom, with polished wood that smelled like ambition and stale coffee, a dozen men and women staring at the chair I was about to take like it might burn them if they touched it wrong. They were waiting for the kid they thought I used to be, or maybe the tech boy from the headlines they didn't quite understand. What they got instead was the man I had become, standing in front of them with a calm voice and a war chest full of quiet rage, finally put to good use. I didn't open with numbers. I didn't bury them in jargon or pitch decks. I started with the one thing they weren't expecting: honesty. "My name is Jaden Ellis," I said, pacing slowly across the floor like I'd done this 1,000 times. "And I built a company from the trunk of a car while eating leftovers from a greasy diner. I didn't do it because I had connections. I didn't do it because someone opened a door for me. I did it because I saw a way to move freight faster, smarter, cleaner, and nobody in this industry wanted to listen. Not until the numbers came in. Not until the old guard started running out of excuses. I looked them each in the eye, one by one, and saw the way their expressions shifted: surprise, discomfort, curiosity, even a little respect from the ones who understood what it meant to claw your way into a room built to keep people like you out. They didn't interrupt, which was a good sign. These were people used to hearing men like Rick pound tables and talk over anyone who questioned them. I wasn't interested in pounding tables. I wanted to own the room without raising my voice. I'm not here to dismantle what's working, I continued, letting the weight of that promise land. I'm here to fix what isn't, the broken systems, the outdated software, the culture that punishes innovation and worships tradition like it's a religion. Coulson was built by hard work, yes. But hard work doesn't mean we stay stuck in 1985. It means we evolve. And if you let me lead, that's what I'll do. For the drivers. For the schedulers. For the people on the floor who keep this place alive. And yes, even for the people who spent 20 years pretending I didn't exist. There was a beat of silence. Then, 2 claps. Then more. And just when the room started shifting towards something close to support, the door slammed open. Rick stood there like a ghost that refused to stay buried, his face red and his suit wrinkled, the tie loose like a noose someone forgot to finish tying. He didn't wait for permission. He marched to the center of the room like it was still his, eyes locked on me with that old fury that used to shut down conversations and end careers before they began. "This is a joke," he spat, throwing a folder onto the table hard enough that paper spilled out. "You think this kid, this soft little code monkey, is going to run Coulson? He's not one of us. He never was." The room held still, uncertain. But I wasn't uncertain anymore. "No," I said clearly. "I'm not one of you. That's exactly why I'm going to succeed." That landed hard. You could feel the shift like a train slamming into a new track. Rick looked like he'd been slapped, and maybe in a way, he had. Because in that moment, he saw that I didn't fear him anymore. That nobody in that room did. He tried to bluster. Claimed I didn't understand the human side of the business. Said I was all numbers and machines. That I'd turn the company into a soulless tech startup with no heart, no grit, no guts. I waited for him to finish. Let him spill every last bitter word, like a man emptying his clip, not realizing he was aiming at a bulletproof wall. When he was done, I walked over, picked up his folder, and calmly handed it back to him. "You wanted a legacy, Rick," I said, my voice low but hard as steel. "Well, you got one. You'll be remembered as the man who built the foundation and then refused to renovate the house while it was sinking." Some of the board chuckled under their breath. Others just stared. No one came to his defense. "You can either walk out of here with some dignity," I continued, "or you can keep screaming until they escort you out." There was a long pause. For a second, I thought he might hit me, but even Rick had to know the difference between anger and suicide, and walking out swinging would have ended whatever scraps of influence he had left. I gave him one last offer. "You can stay on as a senior advisor," I said. "No power, just presence. A symbolic role. Let people believe you're part of the transition. Or you can walk out for good." He sneered, the kind of sneer that shows every crack in a man's pride. "Over my dead body," he growled. I didn't flinch. "That can be arranged." Gasps around the room. Not dramatic ones, just enough to know the line had landed. Alyssa later told me she felt the temperature in the room drop when I said it. But I didn't mean it as a threat. I meant it as a truth. If Rick wanted to go out swinging, I'd let him. But I wouldn't lose sleep if his last chapter ended in silence instead of applause. He turned, stormed out without another word, and the door shut behind him with a finality that felt almost too neat. Too simple. Too easy. The meeting wrapped quickly after that. A vote was taken. I was confirmed. The press release updated. Photos taken. Smiles forced for the sake of appearances. By noon, my name was trending. By 2, Reporters were digging into my history, my company, my so-called meteoric rise. I gave a few statements. Talked about change. Talked about honoring tradition while pushing forward. Said all the right things clean, polished, smart. But when I got back to my office and the door shut behind me, I just sat in the chair, his old chair, and stared at the wall for a long time. Everyone thought I'd won. Maybe I had. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the last line of a story I never wanted to write in the first place. And the ending still wasn't clear. When the dust settled and the press coverage began to move on to the next scandal, the next rising star, the next convenient narrative about change or redemption or whatever word made the front page sound noble, I found myself sitting in the biggest office I'd ever been inside, surrounded by polished surfaces, expensive chairs, and the empty hum of success that didn't echo the way I thought it would. I had the title. I had the power. I had the damn keys to the kingdom, and not a single person clapped when I walked through the door. No toast. No pat on the back. No moment of validation from the people who had spent their whole lives looking at me like I was the spare tire they kept in the trunk in case something better blew out. Rick disappeared the same day the press ran the story about my appointment. No final statement, no retirement letter, not even a sarcastic comment to the media, just gone, like a ghost who knew his haunt had finally been remodeled. Rumors started to fly immediately. Some said he went to Florida to lick his wounds and drink bourbon until the world made sense again. Others said he was trying to fight the board from behind the curtain, still sending out emails that went unread, like a king in exile yelling into an empty canyon. But I didn't care enough to follow the trail. Whatever part of me had once wanted him to see me, to admit I was right, to say maybe he'd been wrong, that part was buried under everything I'd had to become just to survive him. The company was mine now, and it needed work. Not just systems and upgrades and strategy, it needed soul. Real soul. Not that fake blue-collar grit Rick used to sell from the podium like patriotism in a bumper sticker. I wanted something sustainable, something human, something that didn't require fear to function. But even as I made the changes, brought in better logistics software, cut bloated contracts, started employee feedback programs, I felt like I was doing it inside a glass box. I was the man at the top, but I wasn't part of any circle. Not the families, not the old boards, not even the startup crew that once helped me build from scratch. The loneliness didn't announce itself. It crept in slowly, like rot behind a coat of fresh paint. It showed up in meetings where people agreed too quickly, in calls where old friends didn't answer, in the silence after headlines stopped mentioning my name. People respected me, sure, but nobody invited me out for a drink. Nobody pulled me aside to say, hell of a speech. I had taken the crown, but the kingdom didn't sing. Alyssa noticed before I did. She always did. She didn't say much at first, just asked how I was sleeping, if I was eating, if I wanted to take a few days and leave town. I told her I was fine, that I was just adjusting to the weight of it all. She didn't argue. She just looked at me like she knew I was lying but didn't want to make me say it out loud. Eventually she stopped asking. The only person who said anything real to me was my mother. We were sitting in her kitchen one night, just the two of us, the house too quiet for conversation that mattered, but too loud with memories for either of us to pretend we were okay. I didn't even know why I'd gone over. Maybe I was chasing something familiar, or maybe I wanted to know if she still believed Rick's blood was worth protecting. She poured 2 cups of coffee that neither of us touched and sat down with a sigh like she was preparing for something she didn't want to finish. You were always too smart for us, she said after a long pause, staring into her mug like it might answer back. I think we knew that. We just didn't know what to do with it. I didn't reply right away. I just watched her hands, small and tired and still somehow trying to hold the edges of this family together like a patchwork quilt that keeps unraveling no matter how many times it's stitched. She looked older now, not in the way wrinkles settle in, but in the way guilt makes a home under the skin and refuses to leave. He tried, she added, after another silence that weighed too much. In his own way. No, I said finally. He didn't. He just made sure I stayed small long enough for him to stay big. She didn't argue. That was the apology, I think. Not the words, but the silence that followed. The way she didn't defend him this time. I got the call 2 days later, an unknown number from a hospital in Missouri. Rick had collapsed at a gas station off the interstate. Heart attack. Not fatal, but serious. They were stabilizing him. He'd asked for no visitors. No family. No one. I drove there anyway. Don't ask me why. I didn't know what I wanted, closure maybe. Or to see for myself what it looks like when a man built on control finally loses the one thing he can't negotiate with. I stood outside the room for a long time, watching the numbers blink on the monitor through the glass. The man in the bed didn't look like the one who used to knock beer bottles off the porch railing with his voice alone. He looked smaller. Real. And I didn't feel anything. Not hate. Not pity. Not even satisfaction. Just a kind of flat, gray emptiness that made me wonder if winning had always meant feeling like this in the end. The nurse asked if I wanted to go in. I said no. I walked back down the hall and out into the morning light without looking back. No press. No family. No speeches. No clapping. Funny. All my life, I just wanted him to see me. And now? I don't even care if he wakes up.